You ever wake up thinking it's going to be a normal morning only to step outside and find your entire life hijacked by a single parked car? That was me. Coffee in hand, ready to head to work, I walked out to my driveway and froze. Karen, our HOA queen, self-proclaimed enforcer of all things petty, had planted her shiny Lexus sideways across my garage. Not blocking the curb, not just nudging the driveway, no, she had parked it like a barricade, smug and deliberate, making sure I couldn't leave if my house was on fire. I stood there, half amused, half furious, staring at that car as neighbors peeked from behind their blinds. Some shook their heads, others smirked, but everyone knew exactly who was behind it. And in that moment I realized something: if Karen wanted to play games, I had the perfect move waiting for her. Before I dive into the full story, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now in your city? If you've never lived under the rule of a homeowners association, count yourself lucky. Out here in this picture-perfect suburb with its manicured lawns and matching mailboxes, the HOA wasn't just an organization, it was a religion. And Karen, she was the high priestess, the pope, and the executioner, rolled into one. When I first moved in, I thought the HOA was about community standards. Keeping the place nice, making sure nobody parked a rusted-out RV on the front lawn. But with Karen in charge, the HOA became less about order and more about control. She wasn't just a stickler for rules, she manufactured them, twisting the bylaws to suit her moods. I'll never forget my first official welcome from her. I had barely been in the neighborhood a month when she rang my doorbell at 7 a.m. On a Saturday, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her forehead like she was a celebrity avoiding paparazzi. She smiled the kind of smile that carried no warmth, only teeth, and said, "Your grass is a 1/4 inch over regulation height. That's a $50 fine." I thought she was joking. She wasn't. From there, it only escalated. My kids set up a basketball hoop at the end of our driveway, violation. My wife strung up Christmas lights a week too early, another violation. Even the color of our mailbox, apparently it was off black instead of the approved deep charcoal, landed us with a letter. Karen thrived on these little victories, strutting around like a general inspecting troops. But the real problem wasn't the rules themselves. It was the way she wielded them like weapons. She had no friends, only subjects, and she enforced her kingdom with a mixture of fear and humiliation. I wasn't the only one who noticed. Neighbors whispered about her antics at backyard barbecues, always lowering their voices like she might be hiding in the shrubs with a tape recorder. Karen fined me for leaving my recycling bin out for 2 extra hours. One guy told me, shaking his head. Another admitted she once threatened to report their dog as a dangerous breed if it barked past 9 p.m. What baffled me most was how she managed to stay in power. Every HOA election somehow she came out on top. It wasn't because people liked her. It was because she intimidated them. Nobody wanted to cross her, and those who did often found themselves mysteriously drowning in fines, citations, and threats of liens on their homes. For a while I played along. I paid the silly fines. I bit my tongue at the meetings. I figured it wasn't worth the hassle. But one night, during a particularly heated HOA meeting, Karen crossed the line. The agenda was simple: budget allocations, landscaping, blah blah blah. But halfway through, Karen pulled out a special item she claimed was urgent, banning personal clutter from driveways. Her definition of clutter: my kids' bicycles. She projected a photo of my house onto the screen in front of everyone, red circles drawn around 2 bikes leaning against the garage. "Eyesore," she declared, tapping her laser pointer against the photo. "We can't let standards slip. This is what brings down property values." I looked around the room. Some neighbors squirmed in their seats, clearly uncomfortable. Others avoided my eyes altogether. It was like watching a courtroom where everyone already knew the verdict, but nobody had the guts to say it out loud. That was the night I decided I wasn't going to be another one of Karen's victims. I stood up, cleared my throat, and said, "Funny thing, Karen, I thought an HOA was supposed to serve the homeowners, not your ego." Gasps echoed around the room. For the first time, someone had thrown a stone at the Queen's glass castle. Karen's face turned crimson. She stammered something about decorum and respect for authority, but the damage was done. I had drawn a line in the sand. Of course, Karen wasn't the type to forget, or forgive. The weeks that followed were a parade of new notices shoved into my mailbox. One claimed my porch light was too bright. Another alleged my fence was 2 shades darker than approved. She even measured the distance between my trash cans and the curb, leaving me a note that read, "Improper placement warning issued." It was laughable, really, but beneath the humor, I could sense her strategy. She was tightening the noose, trying to make me crack, to prove to everyone else that nobody could defy her and get away with it. That's the thing about bullies. They need to make examples out of people. and I had just volunteered myself as Exhibit A. So when I walked outside that morning and found her Lexus sprawled across my garage, I knew it wasn't random. This wasn't about her needing extra parking space. This was about punishment, about reminding me and the whole neighborhood who was in charge. But what Karen didn't realize was that I had grown tired of playing defense. You can only push a man so far before he starts pushing back. And while Karen loved her little rules and fines, I had something she didn't: creativity, and maybe a few connections she would never expect. As I stood there staring at her shiny car blocking my entire garage, I felt the corners of my mouth curl into a smile. Not the kind of smile you flash for a family photo, but the kind you get when you realize the game has changed. Karen had written the first half of this story, sure, but the ending, that was going to be all mine. The morning it all went down started like any other. The sun was barely peeking over the rooftops, casting that orange glow across the cul-de-sac. I remember standing in the kitchen, sipping my coffee, feeling almost peaceful. For a brief second, I thought maybe Karen had finally gotten bored of me. Maybe she'd found some other poor soul to torment with her measuring tape and rulebook. But peace in a Karen-run neighborhood is like spotting a unicorn. It doesn't last. I opened my garage door, car keys jingling in my hand, ready to head to work. And there it was, her Lexus, parked sideways across the entire mouth of my garage like a smug silver barricade. She hadn't even tried to make it look accidental. This wasn't oops, I pulled in too far. This was deliberate. Her SUV sat there at a cocky angle, taking up every inch of space as if mocking me. For a solid minute, I just stood there blinking. My brain couldn't process the audacity. I've seen people park badly before, double parking, hogging 2 spots at the grocery store, even a car on the lawn once. But this was art, performance theater. She had turned her Lexus into a weapon of psychological warfare. I walked up to the car just to be sure. Nope, no one inside. The engine was cold. She'd parked it there hours ago. And to really hammer home the point, she had left a folded note tucked under the wiper blade. It read, HOA business. Garage access restricted until further notice. Signed, of course, with a looping, self-important Karen B. HOA president. I laughed out loud. Not the happy kind of laugh, but the you've got to be kidding me kind. Was this woman seriously declaring martial law over my driveway? As if on cue, my neighbor Tom wandered over, coffee in hand. Tom's the kind of guy who always just happens to be outside whenever drama kicks up. He raised an eyebrow, smirked, and said, "Looks like you've been promoted to prisoner of war, buddy." Apparently, I muttered. "Any idea what this is about?" Tom shrugged. "You called her out at the last meeting. She's probably making an example of you. You know how she gets." He leaned in conspiratorially. "I'd move your car onto her lawn if it were me." Tempting, very tempting. But before I could even contemplate revenge, Karen herself appeared strutting down the sidewalk like a catwalk model in yoga pants, clipboard in one hand, Starbucks in the other. She looked directly at me, then at her car, then back at me, with a smirk that could curdle milk. "Good morning," she said sweetly. Too sweetly. "I see you've noticed the temporary restriction." "Restriction?" I asked, my voice tight. "You mean your car blocking my garage? It's for official HOA business," she said, taking a leisurely sip of her coffee. "We need access to the side of your property for an upcoming inspection. It's in the bylaws. Page 14, subsection C." I blinked. "You're blocking my car in." She shrugged, as if this was all perfectly reasonable. "Be patient. It's only temporary. Besides, you don't need to drive right this second, do you?" I could feel my blood pressure rising. "Actually, I do. I have a job. Responsibilities. Unlike some people, I can't just sit around inventing new rules all day." That hit a nerve. Her smile faltered for a split second before snapping back into place. "You'd be wise to mind your tone. The HOA takes harassment very seriously." I nearly choked. Harassment. She was the one holding my garage hostage, and somehow I was the aggressor. That was Karen in a nutshell, always flipping the narrative to make herself the victim. By now, a small audience had gathered. Neighbors peeked from their porches, some openly sipping coffee like it was a reality show. Smartphones started appearing. Oh yes, they were recording. Karen noticed too. She straightened her shoulders and raised her voice, projecting for the cameras. "I am acting within my authority as HOA president. This homeowner is being combative and disrespectful. I will be filing a formal complaint." I couldn't help but laugh. "A complaint? For what? Wanting access to my own garage?" The crowd chuckled. A few neighbors even clapped quietly. Karen's eyes narrowed. She hated that. She thrived on control, on silence, on people nodding and obeying. Laughter was her kryptonite. Her lips thinned. "You'll regret this," she hissed low enough that only I could hear. Then louder, "My car will remain here until our inspection is complete." End of discussion. And with that, she spun on her heel and marched back toward her house, leaving her Lexus like a steel middle finger in my driveway. I stood there, fists clenched, watching her retreat. The cameras kept rolling. Tom shook his head, muttering, "Man, she's gone too far this time." He wasn't wrong. Missing work was bad enough. But this wasn't about inconvenience anymore. This was about humiliation. About Karen showing the whole neighborhood she could cage me in whenever she pleased. I went inside and called the police. I explained calmly, thinking surely this was illegal. Blocking someone's garage had to count as trespassing, obstruction, something. But when the officer arrived an hour later, his response was infuriating. "Looks like a civil matter, sir," he said, scratching his head as he glanced at Karen's Lexus. "We don't really get involved in HOA disputes unless there's a direct threat, so she can just block me in indefinitely," I asked, incredulous. He shrugged. "Might be best to talk it out with her." Talk it out with Karen. That was like asking me to wrestle a crocodile. Pointless and dangerous. As the cruiser pulled away, I realized two things. One, Karen had chosen this stunt deliberately, knowing the police wouldn't touch it. And two, if I wanted this to end, I couldn't rely on rules or the HOA or the law. Karen had built her empire on technicalities and intimidation. Beating her at her own game meant thinking bigger. Much bigger. I stared at her, Lexus gleaming in the sun, sitting there like a challenge. And for the first time in a long time I smiled. Because while Karen thought she had me trapped, what she didn't know was that I had friends in high places. Literally. If Karen's blockade was meant to break me, she almost succeeded. Almost. That first day, I missed an important client meeting. The kind of meeting you circle on your calendar weeks in advance. I had prepped my notes, rehearsed my pitch, even ironed my shirt. And then boom, Karen's Lexus transformed my garage into a prison cell. I had to call my boss, stammering through excuses while my coworkers closed the deal without me. The humiliation gnawed at me, and that's exactly what Karen wanted. I could see it in the smug little wave she gave me when I trudged out to get the mail later that afternoon. She knew she'd struck a nerve. But what made it worse was the response or lack of it from the HOA. I wrote emails. I left voicemails. I even dragged myself to the next board meeting thinking surely the rest of the board would recognize this was insane. Instead, they backed her up. "She's acting within the parameters of her duties," one of them droned, flipping through papers like it was all just business as usual. "It's not personal. Not personal." Blocking my garage for days, inventing violations, plastering my kids' bikes on a projector. How much more personal could it get? I sat there in that folding chair, seething as Karen presided over the meeting like a dictator on a throne. She wore that smug half-smile, twirling a pen in her fingers, while the others nodded along like trained parrots. I realized then that the board wasn't a council. It was a puppet show. And Karen was the one yanking the strings. The police wouldn't help, the board wouldn't help, and my patience was running out. But something shifted after that meeting. Maybe it was the way Karen smirked at me when it adjourned, whispering better luck next time under her breath. Maybe it was the way she brushed past my wife in the hallway, muttering about improper holiday decor. Whatever it was, the frustration hardened into resolve. I wasn't going to let her win. It started small. Conversations with neighbors, casual chats on sidewalks, shared glances that lingered a little longer than before. And that's when I began to hear the stories. Linda, from down the street, confessed that Karen once fined her $100 for having too many wind chimes. The Petersons admitted she humiliated their teenage son in front of the board for leaving his skateboard near the porch. Even Jenkins, the toughest guy in the neighborhood, said she slapped him with a violation for growing tomatoes in his backyard, claiming they were visible from the street. One by one, people shared their grievances, and the more I listened, the clearer it became. Karen had made enemies out of nearly everyone. She wasn't respected. She was feared. And fear only works until someone decides they've had enough. For weeks I stewed. My mornings were ruined by the sight of her Lexus squatting in front of my garage. My evenings were filled with fantasies of revenge eggs, paint, maybe even a tow truck in the dead of night. But those ideas were too small, too petty. Karen thrived on petty. If I wanted to beat her, I had to think bigger. That's when I remembered my old college buddy Mike. Mike wasn't just any friend, he ran a helicopter services company out of the county airport. We'd lost touch over the years, but I knew one thing about him: he loved crazy ideas. Back in school, he was the guy who duct-taped a couch to the roof of a dorm just because someone said he couldn't. I called him up one Friday evening, half joking, half serious. Mike, I said, you ever lifted a car with one of your helicopters? There was a pause, then laughter. Not legally, he replied. Why you planning something? I explained the situation. Karen, the HOA, the Lexus blockade. By the time I finished, Mike was wheezing with laughter. Man, you're telling me this woman parks her car across your garage and you want me to, what, airlift it? Not just airlift it, I said, grinning into the phone. I want to give her a show she'll never forget. There was another pause. Then Mike chuckled low and mischievous. You know, I think I've got just the rig for that. The plan started to take shape. Weight calculations, strap requirements, timing. I kept it quiet, playing the role of the frustrated but powerless homeowner, while behind the scenes I was plotting the performance of a lifetime. But the truth is, it wasn't just about me anymore. Every story I heard from my neighbors fueled the fire. Karen had bullied us all. She'd hidden behind the HOA bylaws like armor, twisting them until she was untouchable. But what she didn't realize was that armor only works against small weapons, and I wasn't bringing a slingshot. I was bringing a helicopter. The boiling point came the following week, when I found a bright orange notice taped to my front door. Another violation. This time, improper alignment of garbage cans. Apparently, I'd placed them 12 inches too far from the curb. I tore the paper down, crumpled it in my fist, and laughed. Not a frustrated laugh this time, a genuine laugh. Because right then, I knew she had no idea what was coming. Neighbors noticed the change. Tom asked me why I looked so relaxed when Karen's Lexus was still squatting in my driveway. Got something up your sleeve, he asked, half joking. Maybe, I said. Stick around. You won't want to miss it. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. Karen thought she was the queen of this neighborhood. But soon enough, she was about to learn what happens when a queen forgets that pawns can still flip the board. When people ask me later why I didn't just tow her car, I always smile. Towing would have been easy. Practical. But practical solutions don't make legends. And what Karen needed wasn't just a parking ticket. She needed a spectacle. Once Mike agreed to help, the plan started to take shape like a blueprint in my head. Every night after work, I'd sit at my desk, sketching details on scraps of paper where the helicopter would land, how the straps would hook onto the Lexus, the safest flight path across the neighborhood. I wasn't just thinking about removing her car. I was thinking about making a memory that would stick in every neighbor's mind the next time she waved that clipboard in their faces. The first step was logistics. Mike and I met at his hangar one evening, the smell of jet fuel sharp in the air. He rolled out a diagram of his Bell 407 helicopter, tapping the paper with his grease-stained finger. Lexus SUV, he asked, grinning. Those things weigh around 4,500 pounds. You'll need a heavy-duty rig. Lucky for you, we've lifted shipping containers heavier than that. I raised an eyebrow. You're telling me this is possible? Mike laughed. Buddy, anything's possible with enough straps and bad judgment. We tested equipment chains, hooks, nylon straps, rated for thousands of pounds. Mike showed me how the rig would dangle from the belly of the helicopter like a giant claw machine prize. I couldn't stop grinning. It was ridiculous, insane, borderline criminal, and yet somehow it felt perfect. The second step was timing. The stunt needed witnesses. Karen thrived on public humiliation. Now it was my turn. I picked a Saturday morning when the cul-de-sac would be buzzing with dog walkers, lawnmowers, and porch coffee drinkers. The kind of morning where half the neighborhood would already be outside, ripe for a show. I didn't tell many people, but word has a way of spreading. Tom, of course, knew something was up. He caught me late one night, pacing my driveway, staring at Karen's Lexus like I was studying prey. You're cooking up something, aren't you? He said. Maybe, I answered. Well, whatever it is, I'll be out here with my phone. And that's when it clicked. Phones, cameras, social media. If this worked, it wouldn't just humiliate Karen in front of the cul-de-sac. It would humiliate her in front of the world. Step 3, safety. Mike was a pro, but dangling a car from a helicopter over suburbia isn't exactly OSHA approved. We planned the route carefully. Straight up a slow hover, then across the neighborhood, in a neat arc toward Karen's backyard. Minimal risk, maximum drama. At home, I played the part of the frustrated victim, sighing loudly whenever I saw Karen shaking my head as if I'd given up. She loved it. Every time I caught her peeking out from behind her blinds, she wore that smug grin. She thought she'd broken me. Meanwhile, I was measuring her pool. Late at night, when the cul-de-sac was quiet, I'd pace along the sidewalk in front of her house with a tape measure. Not obviously, of course, I pretended to be fixing a sprinkler or checking my mailbox. But what I was really doing was calculating the exact width of her backyard pool, the clearance around her fence, the angles for the drop. It wasn't easy. Karen's pool wasn't Olympic-sized. It was a modest rectangle barely deep enough to swallow an SUV. But with precision we could hit it. And oh, the irony, her pride and joy, the centerpiece of her summer parties, about to become a graveyard for her Lexus. Step 4. Paperwork. Believe it or not, we made it legal. Technically, Karen's car was trespassing on my property. I filed a notice with the county documenting her blockade and attaching photos. I even got a nod from a buddy in law enforcement who said, if it's blocking your garage and she won't move it, removal is fair game. Did that cover removal by helicopter? Maybe not. But I figured by the time anyone asked, the damage would already be done. As the week ticked down, the anticipation became electric. I'd walk outside in the evenings and catch neighbors whispering, their eyes darting to the Lexus, then to me. Kids zipped by on bikes chanting Karen's car, like it was a circus attraction. And Karen, she basked in the attention. She strutted past the SUV every morning, coffee in hand, as if daring me to do something about it. She even mocked me once. Still trapped, I see. Maybe next time you'll think twice before questioning authority. I bit back my grin. Oh, Karen, if only you knew. The night before the operation, I barely slept. I sat on my porch listening to the crickets, staring at that silver Lexus. Every reflection in its polished chrome whispered tomorrow. At dawn, Mike texted, wheels up in 2 hours. You ready? Was I ready? Not exactly. But was I willing? Absolutely. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself the strongest cup of coffee I'd ever brewed, and looked at my reflection in the window. My heart was pounding, my palms sweaty, but beneath it all there was this electric thrill. Tomorrow wasn't going to be just another HOA dispute. Tomorrow was going to be history. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of morning that makes the neighborhood look like a postcard. The lawns were trimmed, sprinklers ticking in the distance, and kids zipped around on bikes. Birds chirped as if they hadn't gotten the memo that today was about to become legendary. I sat in my driveway with a steaming mug of coffee, deliberately calm, as if it were just another weekend. But inside, my stomach buzzed like a hive of angry bees. The Lexus sat there smug, as ever sunlight glinting off its polished hood. Karen's personal monument to pettiness. Then faint at first came the sound. A low hum, almost like a growl, drifting across the horizon. Heads turned, dogs barked. The hum grew louder, deeper, until windows began to rattle in their frames. And then, there it was. The helicopter appeared over the rooftops' blades, chopping the sky, sunlight flashing off its metal skin. It came in slow, deliberate, like a predator circling its prey. Neighbors poured onto porches. Phones came out. Voices rose in a chorus of what on earth is happening. Tom, of course, was already standing at the edge of my lawn, grinning like a kid at Christmas. The helicopter descended until the rotor wash whipped everyone's hair into chaos. Leaves swirled newspapers, cartwheeled down the street, and the Lexus rocked slightly under the gusts. I didn't move. I just sipped my coffee, eyes locked on Karen's house. Because I knew she was watching. Sure enough, her front door burst open. Out stormed Karen, bathrobe, flapping slippers, slapping against the pavement. She shielded her face against the rotor wash, yelling something I couldn't hear over the thunder of blades. The crew dropped from the helicopter like action heroes, rigging chains and straps with practiced precision. In less than a minute, the Lexus was harnessed, the heavy rig clamped tight around its frame. Karen shrieked. Her voice somehow pierced the chaos. Stop, you can't do this, that's my property. I called back, calm as you please. Funny, you didn't seem worried about my property when you blocked my garage. The crowd loved it. A ripple of laughter cut through the noise. Phones captured every angle, every second. Karen ran toward the SUV, clutching the door handle like she could anchor it with her sheer willpower. The crewman waved her back, shaking his head. She refused to move. So when the helicopter began to lift, she stumbled back, screaming as the Lexus groaned and rose into the air. The whole street gasped. Slowly, impossibly, the SUV lifted off the ground. Wheels dangled inches, then feet, then yards above the driveway. The chains rattled, the straps strained, and then it was airborne. Karen's shrieks turned into hysteria. She danced in circles, flailing her arms. Put it down right now, but the helicopter didn't listen. It hovered steady and majestic, carrying her Lexus like a dangling prize. Neighbors clapped. Some cheered. Tom whooped so loud I thought he'd lose his voice. I just leaned back in my chair, coffee mug in hand, like a man watching the sunrise. The helicopter pivoted slowly, the Lexus swaying beneath it, and began its deliberate flight path over the rooftops. The neighborhood erupted into chaos. Kids chased it on bikes, parents jogged behind with phones raised, and even the mailman stopped mid-route to gape at the sight. And Karen, she was sprinting, or as close to sprinting as slippers allow, following her precious Lexus with wild eyes. I strolled down the sidewalk behind her, casual as ever. "Nice morning for a swim, don't you think?" I called out. She spun hair plastered across her face from the rotor wash. "This is illegal." "You'll be arrested," I shrugged. "So was blocking my garage." "But hey, what do I know? I'm not the HOA president." That earned another wave of laughter from the crowd. The helicopter banked toward her backyard. From where we stood, we could see the sparkle of her pool, pristine and perfect water rippling in the breeze. She had bragged about that pool endlessly, her oasis, she called it, centerpiece of her summer parties. Now it was about to become her nightmare. Karen ran ahead, shrieking as the helicopter positioned over her backyard. The Lexus dangled directly above the pool, swaying like a pendulum. The pilot held it there for a few agonizing seconds, giving everyone time to film, to gasp, to laugh. Then slowly he began to lower. The SUV descended tires, kissing the water's surface, sending ripples across the pool. Karen shrieked, lunging toward the edge, hands outstretched like she could hold back 2 tons of steel. And then splash. The Lexus plunged nose first into the pool. Water erupted in a geyser, drenching Karen from head to toe. Oil shimmered across the surface as the vehicle settled with a sickening gurgle. The crowd exploded. Cheers, laughter, whistles, applause. Phones recorded every second, some people narrating like sports commentators. "And it's in the water, ladies and gentlemen, Karen's Lexus has officially gone swimming." I stood at the edge of my driveway, raising my mug in salute. "Cheers, Karen." She stood there, dripping mascara, streaking down her face, screaming about lawyers and insurance and criminal charges. But her words were drowned out by the roar of laughter. For once, the Queen had no power. For once, the neighborhood wasn't afraid of her. And as the helicopter banked away, disappearing into the sky, I knew this wasn't just revenge. This was history. The splash still echoed in my ears long after the water had settled. For a moment, the whole neighborhood froze, eyes wide, jaws dropped, phones raised. Then, as if someone had hit a switch, the silence shattered into cheers. Neighbors roared with laughter. Kids jumped up and down, chanting Karen's car like it was a halftime show. Even the mailman clapped, slowly shaking his head in disbelief. And there, dripping wet, stood Karen, mascara streaking down her cheeks, bathrobe plastered to her body like a soggy towel. Her slippers squished as she stomped around the pool, screaming at the top of her lungs. "You maniacs, that's my property, you've destroyed it," she shrieked, pointing at me with a trembling finger. I raised my coffee mug in her direction, calm as ever. "Well, technically it's still your property, just wetter." That line nearly killed Tom. He doubled over, clutching his stomach, wheezing with laughter. Half the crowd followed suit, and the more they laughed, the louder Karen screamed. She ran to the pool's edge, leaning over like she could somehow pull her Lexus out with sheer willpower. The SUV bobbed awkwardly, its front end wedged deep, while the back still floated slightly. Oil and gasoline seeped into the water, turning her pristine blue oasis into a murky stew. Inflatable flamingos and pool noodles floated away like survivors from a shipwreck. "You'll pay for this," Karen screamed, voice cracking. "I'm calling the police. I'm calling my lawyer. This is criminal damage." "Funny," I called back loud enough for everyone to hear. "I tried calling the police when you blocked my garage. They said it was a civil matter. Guess that works both ways." That earned another wave of laughter from the crowd. A few neighbors even clapped their hands like they were at a comedy show. Karen spun on them, dripping furious. "And you, all of you, you think this is funny, this is a crime, you should be ashamed," but instead of shame, she got applause. Neighbors cheered, phones still raised some live streaming, others already uploading clips. I heard snippets of commentary, "Oh my God, this is going viral," and "Wait till Facebook sees this." For the first time, Karen wasn't in control. She was the spectacle. The bully who had ruled through fear was now reduced to a meme in real time. The helicopter disappeared into the distance, leaving behind only the ringing in our ears and the sight of Karen's luxury SUV sinking lower into the water. The crowd began to disperse slowly, still laughing, still buzzing. Kids on bikes raced off to tell the rest of the neighborhood. Karen stormed toward me, robe dripping, hair plastered to her forehead. She jabbed a finger into my chest so close I could smell the chlorine on her. "You're finished," she hissed. "I'll sue you for everything you have. I'll bury you in court." I sipped the last of my coffee unfazed. "You'll need a tow truck first. Might want to call one that does underwater recovery." The crowd howled. Karen screamed, spinning on her heel and stomping back into her house, water dripping behind her like footprints of rage. She slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. For a few moments, the cul-de-sac buzzed like it had just witnessed the 4th of July. People came up to me, shaking my hand, patting me on the back. "About time someone stood up to her," one neighbor said. "You're a legend," another added. Even quiet Linda, who usually kept to herself, whispered, "Thank you, for all of us." I nodded, smiling, but inside something shifted. This wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't just about my garage or her Lexus. It was about every single person she'd bullied, every family she'd humiliated. The drop into the pool wasn't revenge, it was justice served with style. Later that afternoon, the police showed up. 2 officers knocked on my door, stern expressions on their faces. I invited them in, calm as ever. "Sir, we received a complaint from your neighbor regarding an incident involving her vehicle," one said. I handed them a folder I'd prepared days earlier. Photos of her Lexus blocking my garage, copies of the notices I'd filed, a signed statement from Tom verifying she'd refused to move it. The officers flipped through the papers, nodding slowly. Finally, one said, "Well, looks like the vehicle was illegally obstructing your property. Removal was within your rights. Methods, unconventional but not technically unlawful." Unconventional, I like that word. The officers left shaking their heads, muttering about crazy HOA disputes. By evening, clips of the spectacle were everywhere. Facebook groups, TikTok compilations, Twitter memes. Someone even set the video to dramatic opera music. Views skyrocketed. And Karen, she vanished. No gloating, no clipboard patrols, no smug appearances at the mailbox. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt free. That night, as I sat on my porch with a fresh mug of coffee, Tom wandered over. He grinned, phone in hand. "You're trending, buddy. Over 500,000 views already. Karen's pool has its own hashtag." I chuckled. "Number Karen Pool Party." He nodded. "Number Lexus Swim. You're a hero." I looked out at the quiet cul-de-sac, peaceful for once, and smiled. For the first time since moving in, I felt like the neighborhood was ours, not hers. But deep down, I knew the story wasn't over yet. Because bullies like Karen never go down without one last desperate swing, and I had a feeling her meltdown was only beginning. Karen didn't show her face for 2 days after the pool drop. The blinds on her windows stayed shut. The Lexus sat half-submerged, like a monument to her downfall, and the cul-de-sac buzzed with more energy than I'd ever seen. People walked their dogs past her house just to gawk, snapping photos and whispering like tourists visiting a landmark. But I knew Karen. Silence wasn't surrender, it was plotting. On the 3rd morning, I got the summons, a thick manila envelope stuffed with legal papers, hand-delivered by some unfortunate courier. Inside was a laundry list of accusations, destruction of property, emotional distress, even reckless endangerment. Karen had gone full nuclear. I almost laughed. The woman who'd parked her car across my garage for days, who'd fined neighbors for wind chimes and tomato plants, now claimed she was the victim. It was so perfectly Karen that I couldn't even be mad. But here's the thing about lawsuits. They require evidence, and I had plenty. Photos of her blockade, copies of violation notices, videos from half the neighborhood showing her admitting it was official HOA business. The case she thought would bury me was in fact the rope she'd used to hang herself. When the hearing finally came, the courtroom was packed. Not because anyone cared about HOA bylaws, but because Karen had built herself a reputation, and everyone wanted to see her fall. Neighbors filled the benches, some openly recording, others whispering excitedly. It felt less like a trial, and more like the season finale of a long-running soap opera. Karen strutted in wearing a blazer 2 sizes too tight, chin-high eyes burning with vengeance. She slapped her papers on the table like she was about to deliver the State of the Union. Her lawyer, a frazzled man who looked like he regretted every life choice that led him here, began with a passionate plea about justice and outrageous behavior. Karen nodded along, smirking at me like she'd already won. Then it was my turn. I stood calm, collected a stack of neatly organized evidence in my hands. "Your Honor," I said, "this case isn't about property damage. It's about abuse of power." I laid out everything, her history of harassment, the bogus fines, the intimidation. I played video clips of her shouting in the street, smugly declaring HOA authority while her Lexus squatted across my garage. I handed over witness statements from neighbors, all detailing years of her bullying. By the time I finished, the room was buzzing. Even the judge looked exasperated. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples like he'd just sat through a bad reality show marathon. "Miss Karen," he said finally, "it seems to me this entire incident could have been avoided had you not deliberately obstructed your neighbor's property." Karen leapt to her feet shouting, "But he dropped my car in a pool." The judge raised a hand. "And you blocked his garage. For days. You escalated this conflict. I find your claims unpersuasive." The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Case dismissed. The room erupted in whispers and muffled laughter. Karen stood, frozen face, pale jaw, slack. For once the queen had no retort. But the humiliation didn't stop there. In the weeks that followed, neighbors emboldened by the spectacle began filing formal complaints against her leadership. Stories poured in. The board once her puppet theater fractured under the pressure. At the next HOA election, Karen's name was met not with applause but with groans. She lost in a landslide, stripped of her title, her clipboard, and the power she had wielded for years. Her Lexus. The insurance company wrote it off as a total loss. Word spread that premiums skyrocketed. And her pool, it had to be drained, scrubbed, and resurfaced, costing her thousands out of pocket. I saw her once more after it all. She was dragging a garbage can to the curb, head down, hair limp. No entourage, no smug wave, no clipboard, just another homeowner stripped of her crown. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the fines, the harassment, the way she laughed when she blocked my garage. And I thought, this isn't tragedy. This is justice. For the first time since moving into the neighborhood, the air felt lighter. People smiled more. Kids played basketball in driveways without fear of fines. Linda rehung her wind chimes. Jenkins replanted his tomatoes. The community finally belonged to the homeowners again, not the tyrant with a Lexus. And as I sat on my porch one evening sipping coffee, Tom wandered over like he always did. "You know," he said, grinning, "they're still talking about it online. The videos hit 5 million views. You're famous." I chuckled. "Not me. The helicopter. The pool. Karen's Lexus. That's the star." He shook his head. "No, buddy, you're the star. You gave us all the win we didn't know we needed." And maybe he was right. Sometimes standing up to a bully isn't about yelling louder or fighting dirtier. Sometimes it's about creativity. About showing the whole world what happens when arrogance finally tips into absurdity. And thanks to Karen, our neighborhood had learned that lesson loud and clear. Looking back, I don't see what I did as revenge. Not really. Revenge is fueled by anger, but what I felt was more like clarity. Karen had built her power on fear, on making people feel small, guilty, ashamed of things that weren't even wrong. She hid behind rules, twisting them until they became weapons. But here's the truth. Bullies only thrive when people stay silent, when no one calls them out, when we all convince ourselves it's easier to endure than resist. That day with the helicopter wasn't just about reclaiming my driveway, it was about reclaiming our dignity, about showing Karen and everyone like her that arrogance has limits. And the beauty of it, I didn't need to hurt her. I didn't need to scream or fight. All I had to do was expose her absurdity in a way no one could ignore. So here's my message to you: don't let the Karens of the world dictate your happiness. Stand up, be creative, lean on your community. Because when neighbors unite, even the loudest bully can't hold power forever. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with a Karen in your neighborhood or an HOA nightmare of your own? Drop your story in the comments below. And don't forget to hit subscribe because trust me, there are plenty more tales of HOA madness coming your way.